We got breaking news here from Dan Graziano of ESPN. Former Colts coach Frank Reich interviewed today with the Arizona Cardinals for their vacant head coaching opening. Bo Brack. Frank Reich, former Colts head coach, got them to the postseason with Phillip Rivers before being fired by that crazy person, Jim Irsay. Was interviewed today by, I would assume, by Monty and Michael Bidwell, maybe after the presser, maybe before. I'll give you my take on it, but at first, Bo, I want to ask, what are your thoughts on that? Are you pro Frank Reich getting an interview, or is that damaged goods? You don't want to touch that?
No, I mean, he's had some decent success. Most of it's come as a coordinator. Obviously he early on in Carson Wentz's career, he was a big part of his success, but it's been a long time since that. That was 2017, that Super Bowl run for that Philly team. And then they were okay in Indy. There was nothing crazy that they did that said, oh, Frank Reich is a guy that's going to, elevate rosters and get them to where they want to go, because they clearly didn't do that when he was with Indianapolis. I'm not a big fan of retreads, and I think he's the number one name as far as retreads go. And I wish, I hope with this new direction that this organization is going, that they're not going to go and take some cast off from another struggling organization. I don't think it was all of Frank Reich's fault as far as the Colts are concerned. If that conversation turns into nothing comes out for Frank Reich as far as returning as a head coach, do they return to him after they've hired somebody else and say, hey, what are your thoughts on maybe being the offensive coordinator? I don't hate that at all. So right. He's had some pretty impressive guys come out from under him, including, cheese crust Nick Sirianni in Philadelphia. So, yeah, I mean, I don't hate that they're talking to him. It's the wide net. You're going to have a couple, shrimp or tires that are going to be caught up in that net. You're not going to catch all the big fish that you want. And I think Frank Reich is kind of more of the former than the latter as far as casting that net.
I can tell you definitively, people within the Cardinals organization love Frank Reich. They love him. He was part of the Ken Wisenhunt staff once upon a time.
Yeah.
He was fired with that staff. He's got a lot of respect in that building. And he went 10-6, 7-9, 11-5, 9-8, and then 3-5-1 this year with an owner who meddled. He is not my first choice. I would probably rather have Brian Flores than Frank Reich as the head coach. Now, a tandem of Flores and Frank Reich, or D'Amico and Frank Reich, sign me up for that, because I think he's got that calming presence. I mean, he made Carson Wentz. I think he threw single-digit interceptions last year and almost 30 touchdowns. Yeah. He came into State Farm Stadium last year on Christmas Day and almost beat the Cardinals, almost won the division. So I don't think this is a nothing throwaway interview. I think he's somebody that the Cardinals like, but I think, to your point, Bo, this feels very much like, hey, we'll circle back around.
Yeah.
Do you want the OC job? Can we pay you a premium to come be our OC? Can you be the Vance Joseph to Cliff Kingsbury, where we bring you in, we pay you good money, and you work side by side? Like Vance was the CEO of the defense, and Kingsbury didn't meddle with the defense, whereas Flores, maybe he wouldn't meddle with the offense as much outside of being a confidant with Kyler Murray. Maybe it's all Frank Reich. I don't hate that mindset. And it's K1 just put in the chat, when his quarterback, who were never mobile, I mean, he was dealt a tough hand by Irsay. He's not picking the players. Frank Ballard was doing that. Now, he lobbied for Carson, but I would argue he got the most out of Carson from anybody recently.
I mean, that Super Bowl season, Carson tore his ACL at the end of the year, but he was the MVP until that 33 touchdowns, 7 picks. I mean, and he was doing it with his legs too. He was the best version of Carson Wentz, and the main reason for that was Frank Reich. It wasn't Doug Peterson. It was Frank Reich. He was the one that was given the flowers for that. But what's interesting about these guys is, as far as the two candidates we've talked about outside of Sean Payton today, Brian Flores and Frank Reich, is that they would both be candidates, regardless of who the head coach is, to join this organization. I mean, you've got Reich, who, if he doesn't get any real traction as far as returning as a head coach, is that OC option. And then Brian Flores is not a DC right now. That's Terrell Austin in Pittsburgh.
Right.
It's not. He's got, I would be shocked if he just returned to his old job with the Steelers. I think Mike Tomlin would be shocked if he returned to his old job, because currently he's the senior defensive assistant and linebackers coach. He's not even the head of that defense. I think there's a very realistic chance that you could get him as a defensive coordinator, let him run the defense. So If just by talking to these guys doesn't mean, like, it's not the Cliff Kingsbury conversation. Hey, this offensive guy would be great OC. Oh no, he's the head coach. It's like, well, no, you're not just talking to these guys. You're having these conversations because you want to be a better franchise, and these are some top candidates on the market that you can bring in some capacity, and it doesn't necessarily have to be head coach. You could pivot at any point.
Yeah, what fits the puzzle, the best scenario, right? And you get a sense who's the best leader of men when I talk to these guys. And again, I mean, Vance is now in that category, but I don't think either one of us foresees Vance Joseph getting this job. But this is the first real external candidate of note outside of the folks we've been talking about, outside of that foursome, that I think has some steam to it. Because again, if you're Michael Bidwell, he's part of, he has familiarity with your franchise. And we just talked about getting outside the franchise. Well, he left and had his best success when he was not with you. He left and went on and had a really good run. I think he was the Chargers OC, and he pivoted, or excuse me, yeah, you mentioned that he went to Philadelphia. Then he, of course, got the Colts job. They made it to the playoffs. They almost won a playoff game with 100-year-old Phillip Rivers. Their offense was very run dominated, right? And so you talk about getting the most out of his quarterback play. It's not my first choice. I would rather have Brian Flores because I think this organization needs somebody like that, but I know a lot of people disagree in that, and that's fine. Would I have a problem with it? No, but to your point, it would, even more so than Brian Flores, because I think most people felt like Brian was inexplicably fired. Like, that came out of nowhere. Whereas like Frank Reich was on the hot seat when this year began, and he got fired 8 games in.
Remember how bad Jacksonville was last year, and they just needed to beat the Jags to get into the playoffs, and they lost? They completely just choked, and that was the beginning and the end. I mean, that was the Cardinals in Detroit last season, in the 2021 season, where it was just like the start of things just unraveling. And that's what happened with Frank Reich. And I think he's well respected around the league. If you watched last year's Hard Knocks, you got to kind of get a glimpse at who he is behind the scenes, what type of leader he is. I think you would probably, if you haven't seen it yet, I think you would probably be, you would like what you see. But at the same token, we know who he is so far. He's had his opportunity. Reich, Flores, they're fine. Obviously, we have our eyes set higher for the Arizona Cardinals. I think that's just where we are. We would like them to, because we view this as one of the premium openings. They're atop the trash heap as far as the 5 franchises that are looking for a head coach. And why would, it's surprising to me. It's just the first one. I'm sure there's no like rhyme or reason like who they're getting in the door. They're going to interview. They're still going to get their interviews with some top candidates. And I would like them to have, potentially second interviews and then also secure one of the top candidates instead of, like, I think things would have to go. I can't imagine that he's their first call or want as far as their head coach.
I think this also throws ice on the fire. The people are saying Cardinals are slow playing this. Like, this is just now getting out. Everybody pumped the brakes on the Cardinals are taking too long. None of these jobs have been filled yet. No. And this is the hiring cycle for the reason. We're in this cycle right now. And here's the great news for everybody stressing out over that. There were 10 openings last year. Barring something completely unforeseen, there are only 5 openings this year. And most of them are in the AFC. I mean, to me, I would feel really good about that if I'm Michael Bidwell, saying, I have so much going for me as a franchise right now, maybe not a month ago, but right now, the 3rd overall pick, cap space, right? A GM who's open-minded to whatever we want to do, having a partnership with my new head coach, etc. And did I mention you're going to have some draft capital potentially coming your way if you want to start anew without DeAndre Hopkins? You're going to be able to give that person the opportunity. If the coach comes in and says, no, I want D-Hop on the team, I want to integrate him in my offense, well, let's have that conversation. So it's just everything's on the table. We should not be surprised by this one iota. But again, maybe tomorrow would be a good opportunity, Bo, to maybe rank how these interviews or these coaching prospects stand with the fan base, with us, what we feel like is the upper tier, middle tier, maybe a lower tier, as we continue to get more information. K1 in the chat, Cardinals need to interview Ben Johnson and Shane Steichen. Who's to say they don't? Who's to say they haven't already? We're just getting this information now as it comes out.
Yeah, and that seemed like, as far as that process, you probably felt like, hey, they're behind the 8 ball a little bit. But this is something that, Ossenfort laid out today. I mean, he got off the plane last night, was at the press conference today, and then was going to get right to work. And it sounds like I wouldn't be shocked if they didn't do their VJ interview today. Talk to Reich, probably talk to Vance Joseph either today or tomorrow, and hopefully get a couple guys on the docket for the rest of the week, including Sean Payton. Let's get it going here.